When every moment matters, can this canine police dog stop death from approaching? A desperate fugitive holds a mother and child hostage in a remote cabin, with the police closing in fast. As the situation escalates, canine police dog Sparky is deployed to take down the criminal, but time is running out. With every decision critical, Sparky and his handler must navigate a treacherous standoff, where one wrong move could cost innocent lives. The clock is ticking, and the tension mounts. Will Sparky's instincts be enough to save them all? Or will the threat end in disaster? Caleb Grant stumbled through the underbrush, his breath sharp and ragged. His jacket, once black, was now stained dark with blood, his leg throbbing painfully with each step. His hand shook, but he kept moving. The sirens were getting closer. It wouldn't be long before they found him. The robbery had gone wrong, way wrong, and now he was running for his life. The sound of police cars echoing through the woods was a reminder he couldn't escape easily. He needed to find somewhere to hide. His mind raced as his feet crashed against the dirt, his heart hammering in his chest. There had to be somewhere. A cabin. Anything. Through the trees, a dark shape loomed. Caleb squinted, and his eyes locked onto a small, weathered cabin, half hidden by a curtain of vines. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. And right now, shelter was all he needed. With a groan, he pushed himself toward it, his body screaming in protest. His head spun with dizziness. He couldn't stop. Not now. The police would be here any second. Caleb reached the cabin and twisted the door handle with shaky hand. It was locked. Of course it was. Panic flared, but he gritted his teeth, took a step back, and kicked the door with all his strength. The wood splintered, and the door swung open with a crash. Inside, a young woman, barely out of her teens, looked up, her eyes wide with shock. She froze, holding a baby in her arms. The baby, a small boy with wide, innocent eyes, stared back at him. Caleb barely noticed. He lifted the gun in his hand, the metal cold against his palm. "Stay back," he growled. "I need to hide." Eliza's heart raced as she glanced between the man and the door. She could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance. Panic rose in her chest. She had no idea who this man was, but his eyes, wild, desperate, told her everything. He was running from something, and he was willing to do anything to stay hidden. "Please," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't want to hurt us. You can't. I'm not asking for your help." Caleb snapped, his voice harsh and shaky. "Just keep quiet and do what I say, or I'll make sure you both regret it." Eliza's mind raced, but she kept her face calm. She glanced at the back room, the only place in the house with a lock on the door. If she could just get him to go there, maybe she could figure out what to do. But it wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't just scared. He was dangerous. She took a step back, keeping her baby close. Just don't hurt us. We won't tell anyone. You can hide here. Just let me." "Shut up," Caleb barked, taking a step forward, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Move." Eliza's pulse quickened. She glanced at the baby, who was beginning to fuss, and then back at the man. He was on edge, and she couldn't show any sign of weakness. With a deep breath, she stepped aside, pointing to the back room. "Go in there. I'll lock the door for you. You can stay there until it's safe." Caleb stared at her, unsure for a moment, but his eyes darted back to the window as the sound of sirens grew louder. He didn't have time to argue. He shoved the barrel of the gun forward, nudging her into the back room. "You first, then your kid." Eliza's heart raced, but she did as she was told. She stepped into the narrow room, the air thick with the smell of dust and wood. Caleb followed her in, forcing her to sit in the corner while he took up a position by the door. He locked the door behind them and stood, his back pressed against the wood, eyes darting to every corner. For a moment, there was silence. Only the distant sirens and the soft, worried murmurs of her baby broke the stillness. Eliza's mind spun. She couldn't let this man stay here. She couldn't let him hurt Jude. But what could she do? She was alone, and he was armed. The baby cooed softly, oblivious to the danger. Eliza kissed his forehead and tried to calm herself. She had to think. She had to stay calm. Outside, Caleb could hear the cars pulling up to the cabin. He clenched his jaw and moved toward the window. His eyes narrowed. He could see the police lights flashing through the trees, closing in on the cabin. The manhunt was about to become a full-on search. His eyes returned to Eliza and her baby. She was still holding Jude close, her face pale, but she didn't show fear, not like the others he'd encountered in his life. There was something steady about her, something calm. Stay quiet, Caleb snapped, his voice harsh. And if you even think about trying anything, I'll do what I have to. Eliza nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had to survive this. For Jude, a sudden, sharp knock on the front door startled them both. Caleb's hand tightened around the gun. His breathing quickened, but his expression didn't change. He wasn't going to go down easy. Is anyone there? A voice called from outside. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. Caleb froze. The police. They were closing in. Every second felt like it could be his last. He turned to Eliza. You got a phone? She shook her head, her eyes wide. No. A cold knot formed in his stomach. If he didn't make it out of this cabin alive, he was going down with nothing. No plan, no way out. But then, he remembered something, a small window at the back. If he could just get out before they realized where he was. Stay here, Caleb hissed, backing toward the window. And don't make a sound. Do you hear me? Eliza didn't answer, but her eyes never left him. She could feel the tension in the room building, like a storm about to break. And she knew one thing for sure. Things were about to get much worse. Before Caleb could move toward the window, another knock at the door, louder this time. Last chance, the officer yelled. We have the cabin surrounded. Caleb's pulse quickened again. There was no escape, not without taking drastic steps. His finger tightened on the trigger. Get ready, he muttered under his breath. This wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was a fight for survival. And Caleb had every intention of winning. Adam, a seasoned canine handler with years of military experience, arrived at the edge of the woods. His eyes scanned the scene ahead. Police vehicles lined up, officers moving with precision, and the small cabin in the distance, now surrounded and cut off from the outside world. The tension was palpable, and it was only a matter of time before something happened. Something that couldn't be undone. Sparky, his loyal German shepherd, stood by his side, eyes locked on the cabin. The dog's body was tense, alert, picking up on the gravity of the situation. He could sense the danger, the uncertainty in the air, just like his handler. Adam glanced around at the officers and SWAT team members, all positioned and ready. He took a deep breath. His mind was calm, but his instincts were sharp. He had seen enough to know how quickly things could spiral out of control. Caleb Grant, the man holding Eliza and her son hostage inside, was unpredictable, desperate, and that made him dangerous. As Adam moved closer to the cabin, his eyes tracked the perimeter. Negotiators had been trying to get Caleb to talk for hours, but his demands were growing more extreme. A getaway car, money, safe passage. The list was endless, and none of it made sense. It was clear that Caleb wasn't thinking clearly. His grip on reality was slipping fast, and that only made him more dangerous. Adam, we're losing him. The voice of one of the negotiators crackled through his earpiece. He's not listening anymore. We need a new plan. Adam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he continued observing the cabin, trying to piece together the little information they had. Inside, Caleb had Eliza and her son, Jude, trapped. From what they knew, Caleb had started to panic. His mind was a mess of threats and fear, and if things kept going this way, he'd make a mistake. He had to. Adam felt the weight of the situation. His thoughts drifted to his past, to the lost memory of his military teammate who had died in the line of duty. That death had haunted him, pushed him to become better, more vigilant. But it also made him realize something important. Every life counted. And if Caleb decided to go too far, he would need to stop him, no matter the cost. Adam turned to Sparky, giving the dog a quick nod. Ready, boy. Sparky's tail flicked once, a silent response. Adam didn't need words. The dog was always ready. He grabbed the dog's harness and adjusted it. They had a job to do. Inside the cabin, Eliza could feel the walls closing in. Caleb paced back and forth, his gun held tightly in his hands. His words were growing more frantic, louder with each passing moment. He was losing control, and Eliza could see it in his wild eyes. She held Jude close, trying to soothe him, though her heart was racing. She knew that the baby's cries were only making Caleb more unstable. It had been hours since Caleb had broken in, and in that time, Eliza had managed to talk to him, calm him down for brief moments, but it was clear he was on the edge of snapping. "You don't get it," Caleb shouted, his hands shaking as he waved the gun in the air. "You think this is just about the money? You think I care about that? I just want to get out of here." He glanced nervously at the window. His eyes kept darting, scanning for any sign of movement outside. Eliza knew she couldn't let him lose it completely. She had to keep him talking. It was the only way to stall long enough for someone to make a move. "Caleb," she said, her voice soft and steady. "I understand. I know you're scared. But there's a better way out of this than hurting us." Caleb stopped, his eyes flicking toward her, though his grip on the gun didn't loosen. He was listening. For a moment, Eliza thought she might have made a breakthrough. "My husband," she continued, keeping her voice even, "was a soldier. He fought in places I can't even imagine. He taught me how to handle tough situations. He taught me how to stay calm when everything feels out of control." For a brief moment, Caleb's eyes softened. His breathing slowed. It was as if he was remembering something that made him human again. But then, as if on cue, Jude started crying again. The noise sliced through the moment, and Caleb's expression hardened. His hand gripped the gun tighter. "Shut him up," he shouted, his voice high-pitched and panicked. "If you don't stop him, I'll—" "Please, Caleb," Eliza said quickly. "He's just a baby." He's scared too. But it was too late. Caleb's eyes were wide, wild with fear, his fingers shaking on the trigger. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. This was it. He was losing it completely. Suddenly, there was a soft sound from outside. At first, Eliza wasn't sure what it was, but then she heard it more clearly. A soft, scratching noise, followed by a faint bark. It was Sparky. Adam had arrived. Outside the cabin, Adam was working with precision. Sparky's nose was to the ground, sniffing the trail Caleb had left behind. The dog moved with purpose, his ears perked up as he tracked the scent through the underbrush. Adam followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the cabin. They were so close now, he could almost feel it. "Keep it quiet," Adam whispered, not that Sparky needed telling. The dog was trained for moments like these, quiet, fast, and deadly accurate. The rest of the team was in position. The SWAT officers were ready to move in if Caleb made any sudden moves. Adam was trying to get a sense of the situation inside. Caleb's frantic energy was rising. The tension was thick. One wrong move, and everything could collapse. Adam glanced at Sparky. The dog stopped for a moment, his nose twitching, then barked once, soft but clear. The sound was enough to alert the team. Inside, Caleb heard the bark too. His head snapped toward the window. His eyes widened with panic. "They're here," he screamed. "They're here to kill me." His mind was spiraling out of control. The door to the cabin suddenly rattled as Sparky slammed his paws against it. The sound of the dog's paws thundering against the wood sent Caleb into full-blown panic mode. This was the moment. Adam's voice came over the radio, sharp and clear. "Get ready. The breach is now." The clock was ticking. Caleb had one chance to give up peacefully. If he didn't, well, Adam was ready for whatever came next. Caleb's mind was a mess. His heart raced faster with every passing minute. His time was running out. He could feel the pressure mounting. Police closing in, nowhere to go. His grip tightened on the gun in his hands. He had to make it out alive. There was no other choice. Money. A car. Something. Caleb's voice cracked. Desperation clear in every word. "I'm not just sitting here to be arrested. I won't go back to prison." Eliza kept her distance, her eyes steady, but her mind was working quickly. She had to keep him calm, keep him focused on something other than the chaos outside. Caleb was unraveling fast, and every time he looked at her, it felt like he could snap at any second. "I can't give you what you want," she said, trying to keep her voice soft. "But I can help you find a way out. You don't have to make this worse." Caleb's eyes darkened, and he stepped closer, his gun aimed at the floor but still deadly in his hands. "Worse," he sneered, pacing again. "I'm already in it. You don't get it. There's no easy way out. I have to make a choice. Either I get out, or they take me down, and I'm not going down." The tension in the room grew thicker by the second. Eliza's hand tightened around Jude, who was quietly crying in her arms. Her heart ached for him, but she couldn't let Caleb see her fear. Outside, Adam moved like a shadow, his eyes scanning the cabin with laser focus. Sparky, the canine by his side, was silent, His ears perked as he sniffed the air. Adam didn't have time to waste. They needed to get closer before Caleb lost it completely. "Stay with me, boy," Adam muttered under his breath, his voice steady. Sparky, with a low growl, followed closely, aware of every step, every sound around them. They were just a few meters from the cabin. Adam's grip tightened on his gun, knowing that the moment they breached, everything would change. The door was their first point of entry, and Adam had no intention of giving Caleb time to react. One wrong move, and Eliza or her son could be caught in the crossfire. A soft bark from Sparky broke the quiet tension. Adam raised his hand, signaling for the dog to stop. Sparky froze, his nose twitching, eyes locked on the door. It was time. Inside the cabin, Caleb's grip on reality was slipping. He was no longer thinking clearly. His steps were erratic, his muttering growing louder and more frantic. He wasn't even noticing Eliza anymore, or the way she was inching toward the back door, hoping for a chance to make a run for it. But the thought of running only sent Caleb further into panic. "They're here," he mumbled, pacing in circles. "They're here to take me away. I won't go back. I won't." Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the cabin. The door crashed open with a force that shook the walls. Sparky lunged through the opening, teeth bared, muscles coiled for attack. Caleb barely had time to react before Sparky slammed in him, knocking him off balance. The gun went flying across the room, but Caleb was too disoriented to care. In that moment, everything went chaos. Furniture flipped over, papers scattered, and the sound of frantic movement filled the air. "Get off me," Caleb yelled, struggling beneath the dog. He shoved Sparky away with all his strength, but the dog wasn't giving up. Eliza screamed as Caleb grabbed a chair, swinging it wildly toward Sparky. The dog yelped and ducked, moving fast to avoid the attack. Caleb's gun was still out of reach, but his rage was the only weapon left. Eliza, desperate, ran toward the door to shield Jude from the madness. "Please, Caleb, stop. You can still walk away from this. It doesn't have to end like this." But Caleb wasn't listening. His eyes were wild, his breath coming in fast gasps. "I don't care anymore," he screamed, pointing toward the baby. "I'll do what I have to." Before Eliza could react, a single shot rang out from outside. The bullet struck Caleb in the shoulder with a sharp crack. He went down with a thud, crashing to the floor, his body twisting as the gun slipped from his hand. For a split second, everything stood still. Caleb's face twisted in shock and pain, and he gasped for air, unable to move. Outside, Adam lowered his weapon, his hand still steady. Sparky's low growl was a constant presence, but the dog had stopped moving, waiting for Adam's command. Inside, Eliza stood frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief. She quickly turned back to Caleb, but the immediate danger had passed. He was on the ground, clutching his shoulder, barely conscious. "Stay back," Caleb hissed, struggling to move, but his strength was gone. His breathing was shallow. Eliza took a step forward, her eyes darting from Caleb to the door. The police would be here any second, and she needed to make sure her son was safe. She could feel the weight of the moment. One wrong move, and it would all spiral out of control. The police stormed in seconds later, their heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. Two officers grabbed Caleb, cuffing his arms tightly behind him, while another checked on Sparky, who was now sitting, alert but unscathed. "Is everyone okay?" one of the officers asked, his voice calm, though his eyes were sharp as they scanned the room. Eliza nodded, her hand still clutching Jude. "We're okay," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the weight of what just happened was starting to sink in. Adam stepped into the room, his face unreadable. He didn't say anything, but his presence was enough. Eliza turned to him, her voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." Adam gave her a brief nod before he walked to the door. Sparky followed close behind, his tail slightly wagging, but his movements slow and deliberate. The night had been long, and they both knew there was little time to rest. As Adam disappeared into the dark woods with Sparky, Eliza let out a shaky breath. The danger had passed, but the events of the night would stay with her forever. The forest, quiet now, was a reminder of the fragile line between peace and chaos.